Arthur Wolfe had just concluded a 10-day trip in search of architectural inspiration. He had been soaking up the creative energy in Miami Beach with his mistress, holding a carefully selected bouquet of champagne-colored roses in his hand. He walked up the steps of his elegant brownstone on Astor Street in Chicago, carrying a slight sense of travel fatigue and a pre-prepared, shallow excuse that he had already rehearsed. The moment he opened the door and stepped inside, he had his excuses ready. It would have been a typical scenario. A sudden issue with a new commercial project. His hands were tied. There was no other choice but to extend the trip. However, what met him was neither the exhausted face of his wife after her recent delivery, nor the crying of his newborn son. It was absolute silence. Marta, the housekeeper, was in the living room, packing the last few trinkets into a cardboard box. Seeing his return, her eyes remained calm, like the surface of a deep lake. She spoke quietly, saying, "Mr. Wolfe, you have returned. Mrs. Wolfe moved out with the baby 15 days ago." Arthur's heart plummeted as if he had fallen from a great height. The air seemed to vanish from his lungs. The roses in his hand emitted a sweet scent that now felt absurdly ironic. "What did you say?" He almost believed he had misheard. He furrowed his brows, and his voice took on the undeniable authority he used at his firm. "Where did she move? To her parents?" Marta gently shook her head, folding the last microfiber cloth and carefully placing it on her cleaning cart. "No, sir. Mrs. Wolfe said she found a new place. She asked me to deep clean the house, and with that, my work here is finished." Arthur's mind went blank. Meredith, his wife, a woman who had always been gentle, obedient, and seemingly entirely dependent on him, had left without a word while he was on a business trip less than a month after giving birth. This was completely out of character for her. It sounded like an absurd joke. He ran up the stairs to the master bedroom. The walk-in closet, which had previously been full of Meredith's clothes, and her vanity, once covered in skincare products, were completely empty. Only his own tailored suits and pristine shirts hung there, looking lonely and as if mocking his return. The faint scent of lavender that always surrounded his wife was gone. It had been replaced by the sterile smell of cleaning supplies. He dashed down the hallway to the nursery. The luxury, handcrafted crib he had picked out himself stood empty. The mobile over the crib, the decorative decals, the packs of diapers, the organic formula in the corner, all traces of the baby's presence had been erased. The room was so immaculate that it seemed as if a new life had never entered it. An unfamiliar panic washed over him. This did not look like the hysteria of a wife who had run off to her mother. This was a complete, pre-planned evacuation. He immediately took out his iPhone and dialed Meredith's number. The subscriber was temporarily unavailable. Once, twice, 3 times. The result was the same. He searched his contacts and called his father-in-law and mother-in-law, going straight to voicemail. In desperation, Arthur ran a hand through his hair and furiously threw the bouquet of roses onto the console table in the foyer. Petals scattered across the hardwood floor. He turned to Marta with a harsh tone. "Did she leave a message, a letter?" Marta's expression remained as unmoved as a detached spectator. "Mrs. Wolfe only said that you would understand everything when you returned, and she also asked me to give you this." She reached into her apron pocket, pulled out a few perfectly folded, printed sheets of paper, and handed them to him. Arthur snatched them, expecting a letter full of reproaches or an emotional list of grievances, but when he unfolded them, his pupils contracted. It was not a letter. It was a professional, meticulously detailed spreadsheet of all his personal financial transactions. It clearly listed every expense from his personal credit card and the supplemental joint card over the last 2 months. From booking the luxury ocean view suite in Miami Beach, to receipts from exclusive restaurants and large charges at the Cartier boutique on the Magnificent Mile. Date, time, location, exact amount. Every transaction was documented with surgical precision, but what froze the blood in his veins was the remarks column on the right side. Written in a cold and objective tone, it contained descriptions like romantic couples package, purchase of matching diamond rings, and women's designer handbag. Every romantic moment he had shared with Delaney on that coast had been reconstructed, quantified, and transformed into irrefutable evidence of his infidelity. A shiver ran down his body from head to toe. How did Meredith get this? He had been careful. He used hidden accounts. How did she manage to compile such a complete forensic audit in such a short time? This was not something a simple housewife could do. His eyes fell to the last line of the document. The fine print read, "For the final judicial settlement, Mr. Wolfe, All the above expenses occurred during my advanced pregnancy and immediate postpartum recovery. I hope your journey in search of inspiration was fruitful. There was no signature, but the calm and composed tone undoubtedly belonged to Meredith. Arthur stared at the financial statements. His knuckles turned white with tension. His pride, his rationality, and his sense of control crumbled. He had always thought Meredith was the safest place in his life. A woman whom, no matter what he did on the side, could be coaxed into coming back with a few sweet words and an expensive gift. But the document in his hands was precise and lethal as a scalpel, revealing his hypocritical facade with one clean cut. He had forgotten who Meredith was before they got married. She was not just a housewife. She was a star, a senior auditor at one of the Big Four accounting firms, specializing in finding the most deeply hidden corruption in seemingly perfect financial statements. For the sake of their family, she had given up her career to support him. He had become so used to her submission that he had forgotten how sharp her mind could be. And now, the blade she had kept sheathed was finally drawn. Marta spoke, suppressing a beat in her chest. When your wife started acting strange, Marta thought for a moment. I think it was the day after you flew to Florida. Mrs. Wolf answered a phone call. Then she went completely silent. She did not cry, she did not scream. She just held the baby and stared at him for a very, very long time. She paused. Then she started calling the moving company and a lawyer. A lawyer? Arthur's heart stopped. The severity of the situation exceeded anything he could have imagined. This was not just a wife leaving home. This was a legal attack, planned step by step. He ran to his home office, opened his MacBook, and tried to log into his online banking to check his personal and investment accounts. But after entering his password, a red warning appeared on the screen. Your accounts have been temporarily seized and frozen pursuant to a court order. Please contact your branch or legal counsel. Court seizure. The words hit him like a hammer. His real estate properties, his stock portfolios, his mutual funds, all the wealth he had worked so hard to accumulate had instantly turned into mere inaccessible numbers on a screen. Without Meredith's cooperation, he could not transfer a single dollar, not even to pay for a hotel. He collapsed into his leather executive chair, feeling true terror for the first time. He could live without Meredith's affection, but he could not survive without the material empire he depended on. He immediately dialed the number of his personal lawyer, Donovan, explaining the situation in a rush. The lawyer on the other end listened in silence for a long time, then spoke in a serious tone. Arthur, the situation is probably worse than you think. If the opposing counsel managed to get an asset freeze order from a judge without your knowledge, it means they presented exceptionally strong evidence. Usually, this means the judge believes there is an imminent and significant risk that you will hide, transfer, or dissipate marital assets. Strong evidence. The spreadsheet flashed through Arthur's mind, but he could not believe a few luxury purchases could justify freezing his entire life. Yes, the lawyer continued. For example, if they prove you transferred large sums of money to a third party not directly related to you, or that you used marital funds to purchase goods, real estate, or luxury cars for another person. Arthur, have you been doing anything like that? A cold sweat broke out on Arthur's hand gripping the phone. He thought of Delaney. To keep her happy, he had not only paid the rent for her luxury condo in River North, but he had also given her a supplemental credit card for daily expenses, and literally last month, he had wired a project bonus of $1.5 million directly into Delaney's account under the guise of a loan. He always believed those transactions were untraceable. At that moment, his phone screen lit up with a message from an unknown number. He opened it, and his heart almost stopped. It was a photo. In the background was the sterile environment of a neonatal intensive care unit. His son, that tiny life he had only seen a few times, was lying in an incubator, connected to multiple monitors and IV lines. His tiny face had a terrifying yellow tint. Below the photo was just one line of text. While you were enjoying the sun and the beach, your son was fighting for his life here with severe acute hemolytic jaundice. The doctor said that if I had brought him even half a day later, he would have suffered irreversible brain damage. At that moment, all his anger, confusion, and panic were buried under an overwhelming and suffocating wave of guilt. Before his trip, Marta had mentioned the baby looked a little yellow, but his thoughts were entirely focused on his escape to the resort. He simply brushed it off, saying jaundice in newborns was normal. Just put him closer to the window so the sun hits him. And he pushed the topic out of his head. He never imagined his negligence almost cost his son his life. He jumped up, grabbed his car keys, and ran to the door. He did not care about the money or the firm anymore. He just wanted to see his son. He had to see Meredith. He had to explain himself, apologize, fix everything. But when he reached the foyer, Marta blocked his path. She handed him one last thing. "Mr. Wolf, Mrs. Wolf asked me to give you this. It is the final piece of evidence." It was a sleek silver USB drive. Arthur looked at it, feeling an ominous premonition tighten his chest. With trembling hands, he plugged it into his laptop and opened the only audio file. A familiar yet simultaneously foreign voice came through the speakers. It was Delaney's voice, full of pride, flirtatious and provocative. "Meredith, do not misunderstand. Arthur loves you, but he needs me. You know he is a top-tier architect. Inspiration is more important to him than his own life. And I am the one who gives it to him." She paused. "He told me that living with you is like looking at a stagnant swamp. Peaceful, but completely boring. I am the spark that makes him burn again." In the background, there was the hum of a bustling coffee shop. Arthur could clearly picture the scene. Delaney sitting across from Meredith, elegantly stirring her iced coffee, uttering those devastating words. Then came Meredith's voice, so calm, so devoid of emotion that it was terrifying. "So he asked you to come to me and tell me to step aside?" No, Delaney laughed softly. "Arthur is very sensitive. He does not want to hurt you, especially now that you just had a baby. I just hope you understand. You know how men are. They need variety. I do not intend to destroy your family. I just want his company from time to time, like on this trip to Miami. He said it was in search of inspiration for a new project. And you believed him." Her tone became more venomous. "Look at yourself. Guarding the house. Babysitting that constantly crying kid. What do you get? Only his superficial attention and less of his time. Meanwhile, I do not have to do anything, and I get all his passion and generosity. Just last week he wired me $1.5 million. He said it was spending money. Meredith, tell me, who do you think he really cares about?" The recording abruptly cut off. Arthur froze as if struck by lightning. The $1.5 million he had wired Delaney were dividends from one of his firm's projects. He had told Meredith the client had not yet paid the final invoice. He thought it was a white lie. He never imagined it would become the dagger Delaney would plunge into his wife's heart. But what terrified him the most was that, upon receiving this recording, Meredith did not cry, did not scream, did not make a scene as a normal woman would have. She showed not the slightest sign of distress. She simply and silently gathered the evidence, contacted the best divorce lawyers, arranged everything regarding their son, and then, right when he was most confident and carefree, delivered the most devastating and lethal blow. How well did he really know this woman? Her coldness, her rationality, and her capacity for endurance were like a giant web slowly tightening around his neck while he noticed nothing. Unable to bear it any longer, he ran out of the house like a madman, got into his Porsche, and sped toward the address of Lurie Children's Hospital, which he had found online by tracing the monitors in the photo. He flew through countless red lights. He had only one thought in his head. Find her. I must find her. Half an hour later, he burst into the waiting room of the neonatal intensive care unit. Through the thick glass windows, he spotted her immediately. Meredith was wearing a simple white button-down shirt and blue jeans. Her body, still weak from childbirth, seemed fragile, but her back was absolutely straight. She was deeply focused on a conversation with a doctor in a white coat, holding a small notebook and taking notes. Under the fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor, her profile looked incredibly calm and resolute. This was not the gentle and quiet wife he remembered. This was a completely unknown woman, exuding overwhelming strength. Arthur ran to the glass, banging on it with his hands to get her attention. Meredith, please, listen to me. Meredith seemed to notice the noise and slowly turned her head. Her gaze passed through the glass and settled on Arthur's desperate face. In her eyes, there was no anger, no resentment, not even the slightest emotion. There was only a dark, deep, unfathomable void, as if she were looking at a complete stranger who had absolutely nothing to do with her. She remained silent, looking at him for 2 seconds, and then turned her head away again, resuming her conversation with the doctor about her son's condition, as if Arthur simply did not exist. That complete and absolute indifference was more terrifying than the fiercest argument. Arthur felt all the strength drain from his body. He leaned helplessly against the cold wall. At that moment, his phone rang. It was his lawyer, Donovan, whose tone conveyed extreme urgency. "Arthur, it is a disaster. I just received a supplemental filing from the opposing counsel. Your partner, Clayton Barnes, has just submitted evidence to the court on behalf of the firm. He is formally accusing you of corporate embezzlement and breach of fiduciary duty." Corporate embezzlement. Arthur's head was ringing. He could not comprehend the meaning of the words. He and Clayton were college friends. They had built their architecture firm from scratch. Over 15 years of friendship, they were practically family. How could Clayton accuse him? It was impossible. Clayton would never do that. "Arthur, calm down and listen," Donovan interrupted him with unprecedented severity. "The evidence they submitted is irrefutable. It includes bank statements showing you falsified project expenses and purchase agreements to funnel company funds into your personal accounts." He paused before continuing. "The largest transaction is that $1.5 million you recently wired to a girl named Delaney. The opposing counsel argues this money was not personal dividends, but illegally misappropriated funds from the budget of an ongoing project." Arthur felt as if he had been plunged into ice water. To satisfy Delaney's growing appetite for a luxury lifestyle, he had resorted to questionable accounting maneuvers, using his position to alter numbers on certain projects. He thought he had done it flawlessly, convinced that not even the firm's internal accountant would be able to detect the irregularities. But he forgot what Meredith did before she married him. She was an auditor, and one of the best, specializing in detecting the most hidden machinations in seemingly perfect reports. After the wedding, she voluntarily chose to stay in the shadows to support him, and he got so used to her apparent submissiveness that he forgot about her brilliant mind. Now, the mind that had remained quiet was back in action. Clayton could not have missed those records. "Why is he doing this now?" Arthur muttered, unable to accept the betrayal of his best friend. "Arthur, that is exactly the point," Donovan replied with a depressed tone. "My hypothesis is that your wife went to Clayton first, showed him the preliminary evidence of your embezzlement as a partner. If Clayton knew about this and did not report it, or worse, covered it up, he faced criminal liability and the loss of his license. Faced with the necessity of saving the firm and his own future, he had no choice. Your wife executed a perfect move. She eliminated your last ally." The phone slipped from Arthur's hand and fell to the hospital floor. The screen shattered into tiny pieces. He finally understood Meredith's plan. She did not just want a divorce. She did not just want a division of assets. She used her professional expertise to deal him a precise and devastating legal blow. First, she used bank statements and the audio recording to prove infidelity and the dissipation of marital assets, securing the freeze on his personal accounts. Then, she used her audit skills to expose his corporate fraud and turn his own partner into his accuser, destroying his career and primary source of income. Every step was connected. Every blow was lethal. As he stood there turned into a shadow of himself, his Apple Watch vibrated. It was Delaney. Her voice sounded shrill, hysterical. "Arthur, why did they decline my Amex Platinum? I was at the Louis Vuitton boutique on Michigan Avenue, and the cashier said insufficient funds right in front of everyone. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? And that money you wired me, the bank just called. They say the funds are frozen pending a fraud investigation. What is going on?" Listening to her complaints, Arthur felt deep disgust for the first time. What had previously seemed charming to him now sounded empty, superficial, and irritating. "All my accounts are frozen by court order," he answered exhaustedly. There was a few seconds of silence. Then came an even more piercing scream. "Frozen? What about my rent and what you were supposed to give me next month? Arthur, did you not say you were a successful and influential architect? How could you let this happen?" Arthur was unable to answer. "I do not care. That is your problem. Fix this immediately, or we are done." The call abruptly ended. Arthur looked at his shattered phone on the floor and let out a hollow, bitter laugh. Here was his spark of inspiration. The moment he could no longer offer her money, the only thing still burning was himself. He looked up and glanced through the glass of the neonatology ward again. Meredith had already finished her conversation with the doctor. She stood next to the incubator, looking at her son with deep tenderness. On her face, there was not a trace of triumph, nor satisfaction, nor a desire for revenge, only a serene calm, as if she had simply completed a difficult but necessary task. At that moment, his work phone in his jacket pocket vibrated. He took it out. It was a new email from Meredith's lawyer. Subject: Settlement draft regarding embezzlement by Arthur Wolfe. He opened it and quickly scanned the text. The terms were ruthlessly simple. Meredith would agree not to pursue additional civil claims for the dissipation of marital assets and would not demand the maximum sentence in a criminal trial, provided he accepted an incredibly harsh divorce settlement. He would have to forfeit 90% of all marital assets, including the house and all his investments. His stake in the architecture firm would be transferred to Meredith at a minimum valuation as compensation for the embezzled funds. The only things he would be allowed to keep were his car and a basic checking account. Furthermore, he would have to pay maximum child support until the child turned 18. This was not a divorce. This was a financial execution. At the end of the letter was a message relayed by Meredith's lawyer. Mr. Wolf, my client wishes to clarify that she is not acting out of revenge, but to recover what rightfully belongs to her and her son, including everything you took from this family and the firm you founded. You have 24 hours to consider. If you refuse, you face 2 major lawsuits and up to 10 years in a maximum security prison. Tick-tock. The analog clock on the hospital wall ticked like a countdown to death, mercilessly hammering at Arthur's already ruined nerves. He looked up, gazing desperately at the silhouette behind the glass. He knew this was not an idle threat. If Meredith said she would do it, she would do it. At that moment, the doors of the neonatology ward opened with a soft hiss. Meredith slowly walked out. She walked straight past him, not giving him a single glance. Arthur rushed forward and grabbed her arm. His voice broke in a plea. Meredith, please, I am begging you. Can we talk for the sake of our son? Meredith stopped, slowly turned her head, and looked him straight in the eyes for the first time. Her gaze was cold as ice. She pronounced every word with absolute clarity. Arthur, when you were playing on the beach with another woman, completely ignoring your newborn son who was severely ill, you lost all right to use the word son in my presence. Having said that, she easily pulled her arm free and continued walking down the hallway, not looking back. Her posture was hard, unyielding. Every step crushed the remains of Arthur's heart. He watched her disappear around the corner. His legs finally gave out. He slid down the wall and collapsed onto the cold linoleum. At that moment, he understood that his life, in the form he knew it, was over. He thought he was only losing his wife. Now he understood he had lost his entire universe. And the architect of this destruction was himself. Sitting paralyzed on the freezing hospital floor, he felt every ounce of strength leave his body. The smell of disinfectant burned his nose, causing nausea. It was a complete, devastating defeat with no chance to fight back. His career, his financial empire, the relationships he thought he controlled, everything was destroyed in one night. And the person who orchestrated it all was the wife he had always considered the weakest. The letter on his phone glowed like a final ultimatum. 24 hours. He had 24 hours to decide whether he would spend the rest of his life in ruins or in prison. He forced himself to get up from the floor, moving like a living corpse, and stumbled out of the hospital. He did not drive home. That empty, sterile house would only suffocate him more. He also did not drive to the office. He did not have the courage to face Clayton or the employees who once respected him. He drove emotionlessly through the streets of Chicago. The neon lights reflected on his pale, lifeless face. He used to love this city. Here he had gone from a penniless college student to a successful and recognized architect. He believed he owned this city. Now he understood he was nothing more than a defeated man who was about to be thrown away like trash. Unconsciously, he drove to the luxury high-rise in River North where Delaney lived. He did not know why he came. Maybe he needed to talk to someone. Maybe he was desperately seeking comfort in that passion he had become addicted to. He took the elevator up and opened the door with his spare key. What he found was not Delaney's embrace, but an almost empty living room. Several large suitcases were open on the floor. Delaney was hastily packing designer bags and clothes into them. Seeing him, she froze for a moment. A look of panic flashed across her face, quickly replaced by a cold and defensive glare. What are you staring at? You are bankrupt. What made you think I would stay here to starve to death with you? Arthur looked at her. The last illusion in his heart crumbled to dust. All the expensive gifts he had given her were now just things she was trying to take before fleeing. Did you not say you loved me for who I am, and not for my money? He said with a bitter smile. Delaney did not even look up, tucking a diamond necklace into a velvet box. Yes, I loved you, but love pays the rent. Her tone was mocking. Arthur, do not be naive. I am a young girl in the prime of my life. Why would I put up with a middle-aged guy? I wanted a better standard of living. You can no longer give me that, so it is over. Her words were like poisoned daggers, precisely piercing his already broken heart. Suddenly, everything seemed absurd to him. For this woman, he had betrayed his wife, abandoned his son, and ruined his own career. That $1.5 million I wired you was company money. It is dirty money. If you use it, you could be considered an accomplice, he said coldly. Delaney's hands immediately stopped moving. Her face paled. She quickly pulled a debit card from her bag and threw it on the floor at his feet. This is your card. The PIN is your birth date. I have not touched a dime of that transfer, she stammered nervously. Do not contact me again. With a sudden movement, she closed her suitcase and walked out of the apartment, leaving him alone with the sight of her departing back. Arthur was left alone in that empty, echoing space. He picked up the card from the floor and let out a soundless laugh. Here was that passion for which he had sacrificed everything. This is what it was. It came fast and left even faster, leaving only ashes behind. His phone vibrated again. It was his lawyer. Arthur, time is running out. What is your decision? If the case goes to court and the prosecutor files formal charges, it is all over. Arthur sighed deeply, gathering the remnants of his strength. Tell the opposing counsel that I agree. I will sign. The moment he made that decision, he felt as if his soul left his body. He had lost, and he accepted it. Perhaps being left with nothing was the easiest price he could pay for his arrogance and betrayal. The next day, accompanied by Donovan, Arthur signed the humiliating divorce settlement. Watching his ink dry on the paper, he felt the first half of his life ending pitifully and miserably. Stepping out of the law office, the sun blinded him. He stood on the sidewalk, not knowing where to go. He had lost his home, his career, and his wealth. He thought of the baby who was still in the hospital. He was his only blood, his last connection to the world. Driven by an invisible force, he drove back to the hospital, but this time he did not go to the neonatology ward, but to the medical records department. Calling in a favor from an old doctor acquaintance, he begged to be allowed to review his son's medical history. When he held the thick folder and began turning the pages one by one, his hands started to shake uncontrollably. The files detailed the entire process from the child's birth to his sudden hospitalization. He read that on the 3rd day after birth, Meredith noticed abnormal jaundice levels and consulted a pediatrician. The doctor recommended observation. On the 5th day, an anxious Meredith paid out of pocket for a full blood test for the baby. The results showed dangerously high levels of hemolysis. The doctor ordered immediate hospitalization, but the pediatric ward was full. From that day on, Meredith drove between home and the hospital every day, holding the baby in her arms, monitoring bilirubin levels, and waiting for a bed to open up. Those were the exact days when he was in Miami Beach with Delaney, drinking cocktails with an ocean view. On the 10th day, the baby's condition rapidly deteriorated. The jaundice index spiked to a critical level. Meredith made a decision in a matter of seconds, signed the emergency consent forms, and rushed the baby to the neonatal intensive care unit for urgent intervention. The attending doctor's notes were crystal clear. The patient was admitted just in time. A delay of a few hours would have led to bilirubin encephalopathy, causing irreversible neurological damage. And on the fields for the signature of the father or guardian, Meredith's name appeared over and over. The lonely, persistent, desperate line designated for the father remained completely blank. Arthur turned the pages, and the tears he had been holding back finally flowed, streaming down his face. He had always believed Meredith's revenge was driven by the pain of a betrayed woman. Now he understood that the true point of no return was not his infidelity, but his complete indifference to their son's life. While she alone ran through the hospital corridors holding her baby who hovered between life and death, signing documents that could determine his fate, he was thousands of miles away, conquering another woman. That deep, tearing pain had turned her heart to stone. Arthur stumbled out of the archives with chaos in his head. And then, at the end of the hallway, he saw her. Meredith was holding the now discharged baby, wrapped in a soft blanket and sleeping peacefully. Meredith looked exhausted, but her face radiated a new calm, a serene stillness. Arthur instinctively took a step forward. He wanted to approach. He wanted to see his son. He wanted to say how truly sorry he was. But right at that moment, an elegant, handsome man walked up to her. With a natural movement, he took the baby into his arms with one hand, and with the other, he gently supported Meredith by the elbow. Arthur recognized him immediately. It was Dr. Julian Mercer, a renowned pediatrician, and Meredith's former college friend. Julian looked tenderly at the baby, then looked up at Meredith and said in a soft voice, "Meredith, the worst is behind us. From now on, I will take care of you both." Meredith looked at him and smiled a genuine, warm smile that Arthur had not seen in years. It was a smile full of gratitude, trust, relief, that peace which he had never been able to give her. At that moment, Arthur froze, feeling like the most absurd laughingstock in the world. He had believed all this was solely Meredith's doing, a cold, brilliant strategy executed in solitude. But now he understood the story behind it. He thought Meredith had fought the war alone, but in her darkest moments, someone had been there for her. Someone who offered her medical help, guidance, and support. A terrifying thought began to sprout in his head. What if this perfect counterattack was not just Meredith's idea? The thought wrapped around his chest like poison ivy, choking him. He stood motionless, watching Meredith and Dr. Mercer leave the hospital together and get into a black Range Rover parked at the entrance. They moved in the harmony of a true family. Arthur's mind went blank. He remembered Julian Mercer. Back when Meredith was in college, Julian clearly had feelings for her, but Arthur had won her over with his persistence and the promise of a luxurious life. He thought Julian was part of the past. He never imagined that, at the moment he neglected Meredith the most, this man would return to her life as her protector. When he rethought the facts, everything began to fall into logical place. How had Meredith managed to identify the severity of the baby's jaundice so quickly and demand urgent help? Because a specialist guided her. How had she found the determination to carry out such a precise legal attack? Because she was not alone when she needed it most. Perhaps Julian had helped her find the best divorce lawyer. A deep chill ran through Arthur's body. He believed his betrayal had caused Meredith's transformation. Now he understood he was merely a catalyst. What truly transformed her was the enduring support that held her up when she was falling. His punishment, from the very beginning, was a perfectly prepared execution. It was not unjust. He watched the black car disappear into the stream of traffic. He felt exiled from the world. He had lost everything he considered his, and Meredith, by abandoning him, had clearly found something better. The following days became a true purgatory for Arthur. He moved from the multi-million-dollar villa that symbolized his success to a small apartment in Joliet with rent at $500 a month. Thanks to the surrender of his shares and the return of the funds, Clayton decided not to press criminal charges for embezzlement, but his reputation in the Chicago architectural world was completely destroyed. No self-respecting firm wanted anything to do with him. He was forced to sell his Porsche and survived on the meager savings he had left. He tried to take on freelance projects, but the wealthy clients who once admired him now avoided him. He fell from the very top into the mud and learned the true taste of human indifference. Delaney vanished without a trace. His friends stopped answering his calls. He began to suffer from chronic insomnia. His mind played memories on a loop. He remembered the first time he saw Meredith in a white blouse, quietly reading in the library. He remembered her tear-filled eyes at their wedding. He remembered a pregnant Meredith making him something to eat in the kitchen late at night. Those moments, which he once considered simple or even boring, were now priceless memories he could never get back. He finally understood that what he had destroyed was not something trivial. It was the most precious thing he possessed. He began to miss his son with a physical ache, that little life he had barely held in his arms. According to the divorce settlement, he punctually paid child support every month, but he had no idea how the baby was doing. Was he growing well? Was he smiling yet? A few times he drove to the neighborhood where Meredith's parents lived, parking at a distance, hoping to catch a glimpse of him even for a moment, but he never succeeded. Meredith, it seemed, anticipated his every move, keeping the child completely out of his reach. Until one day, 3 months later, he received an unexpected phone call. It was Clayton. His voice sounded strange, a mix of embarrassment and pity. "Arthur, where are you? Can we meet?" Arthur hesitated for a moment but agreed. They met in a rundown coffee shop. Clayton looked older, more tired. He poured him a cup of coffee and remained silent for a long time before speaking. The firm is now completely under Meredith's control. She brought in a team of professional managers, and to be honest, business is better than when we ran it. Arthur's hand froze over his cup. He said nothing. "I know you hate me," Clayton sighed. "But when Meredith put those documents in front of me, I had no choice. Either the firm went under and we both went to prison, or I sacrificed you to save the company and the 40 employees who depend on it. I understand, Arthur replied with a trembling voice. At this point, he no longer had the right to hate anyone. Actually, I am here on behalf of someone else. Clayton pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase and slid it across the table. Meredith asked me to give this to you. Arthur froze. He thought that aside from the monthly child support transfers, their paths would never cross again. With trembling hands, he opened the envelope. It was not a legal document. It was a set of photographs. Pictures of his son. They were professional photos from the first year of his life. The boy being christened, dressed in a tiny suit, smiling with radiant joy. In others, he was crawling on the grass, chubby-cheeked, and in one particular photo, the baby was in a stroller, while Meredith, crouching beside him, looked at him with absolute, pure love. Every photo documented the child's growth and Meredith's happiness as a mother. At the bottom of the envelope lay a small card. In Meredith's elegant handwriting, it read, "He is doing very well. I hope you will also be able to start a new life." Arthur's tears fell onto the table. This set of photos became the only pale light in his dark world. He kept them carefully and looked at them every night. The sight of his son's innocent smile seemed to slightly ease the pain he carried in his chest. Meredith's message, "I hope you will also be able to start a new life," was a distant blessing and a final farewell. He understood she had completely left the past behind and started a new chapter with their son, and that he too must rise from the ruins he himself had created. He stopped striving for the impossible. He abandoned the idea of a grand comeback. He buried the ego of a successful architect and came back down to earth. He got a job at a small remodeling and construction firm in Naperville, starting as a junior draftsman. His colleagues did not know his past. They only saw a middle-aged man who had failed in life. Every day he drew basic floor plans, visited dusty construction sites, measured, and supervised electrical and plumbing installations. The work was hard, and the salary was just a fraction of what he used to spend on a single meal. But for the first time in his life, he felt a connection to reality. Every evening, returning to his small apartment, he cooked something simple and then opened architecture books, relearning the fundamentals he had previously neglected. He discovered that by rejecting superficial aesthetics and pretentious ideas and returning to the primary goal of creating safe, comfortable, and functional spaces, he regained his love for design. He stopped chasing flashy facades. He started focusing on eco-friendly materials, on the logic of space, on whether the height of a kitchen counter was actually comfortable for the person cooking. His designs no longer served to feed his ego. They served people. 6 months later, the firm received a complicated project. A client had bought a house with a chaotic layout, full of load-bearing walls and terrible natural lighting. Several designers had failed to find an effective solution. The project manager was desperate. Arthur silently took the blueprints and studied them for 3 days. On the third day, he presented a complete redesign. He did not propose tearing the house down. Instead, through the smart use of mirrors, the reorganization of non-load-bearing walls, and precise lighting design, he managed to maximize space and light. Every detail was backed by structural calculations and rigorous technical specifications. It was solid, professional, flawless work. The client immediately approved the design. That project made him a key figure in the small firm. His boss started entrusting him with more important jobs. Gradually, his life began to stabilize. He still paid child support on the first of every month, but he never tried to interfere in Meredith's life. He knew that staying on the sidelines was the only right thing he could do for them. 2 years passed unnoticed. Arthur was now the lead designer at the firm. He no longer sought recognition. He focused purely on his work. His designs began to build a reputation among clients for their functionality, professionalism, and deep humanity. One day, while working in his office, the secretary called on the intercom. "Arthur, Dr. Julian Mercer is here to see you." Arthur's heart stopped for a moment. He walked out into the hallway and opened the door to the conference room. There stood the man he had never forgotten. Julian looked the same as he did 2 years ago. Handsome, calm, serene. Seeing him, he stood up and politely extended his hand. "Arthur, good afternoon. I apologize for coming unannounced. I hope I am not interrupting." Arthur shook his hand tensely, while his mind filled with doubts. "Dr. Mercer, what brings you here?" "It is Meredith. She wants to meet with you," he answered simply. Arthur looked up in surprise. "Meredith wanted to see him? Is everything all right, and Beckett?" he asked immediately. They are both perfectly fine, Julian replied with a genuine smile. He paused for a moment before continuing. Arthur, I know you might have had misconceptions about my role in the past. That is why I wanted to clear the air before you see her. When Meredith found out about the betrayal and Beckett was in intensive care, I was there to support her, but everything she did, the audit, the legal strategy, was her decision. I only offered medical help for Beckett and support as a friend. She is much stronger and more independent than you ever imagined. Arthur remained silent, so his paranoia had merely been a projection of his own guilt. Because he himself was capable of deceit, he assumed everyone was conspiring. She wants to meet with you today because there is an important decision that requires your consent, Julian added in a serious tone. Arthur's chest tightened. Is it Beckett? Is he sick? No, please do not worry, Julian replied. Beckett is completely healthy. He paused briefly. The matter is about something else. Meredith and I are getting married. After the wedding, I want to give Beckett a complete and united family. I want to officially adopt him. The word adopt hit Arthur like a wrecking ball. He knew the law. If he consented to a step-parent adoption, his rights as a father would be permanently terminated. Legally, he would become a complete stranger to his own son. For the adoption process to be valid, the court requires the voluntary relinquishment of parental rights by the biological father. Julian continued. Meredith has already consented. Now we need your signature. He pulled a thick legal document from his briefcase, a consent to adoption and relinquishment of parental rights. Arthur stared at the paper. His hands trembled violently. He wanted to refuse. He wanted to scream. No, that is his son. Why should he give him away to another man? But on what grounds could he refuse? For the last 2 years, Julian had been by Beckett's side. Julian had seen Beckett take his first steps. He had heard his first words. When Beckett had a fever in the middle of the night, Julian was the one holding him in the waiting room. And what had he done? Arthur, the biological father, apart from cold and automatic bank transfers, what had he contributed? He did not even have the right to hold his own son. Julian seemed to sense his anguish. He spoke gently. Arthur, I know this seems cruel, but think about Beckett. He is over 2 years old, starting to understand the world. Soon he will go to preschool and will ask why other boys have a daddy at home, and his daddy only appears in a few photos. He paused. I want to adopt him not to take anything away from you, but to give him a complete childhood without confusion and stigma. He will have a mother who loves him deeply, and a father who will treat him as his own. He will grow up in a home full of love. He sighed deeply before continuing, and we will not lie to him. When he is old enough, he will know the truth. He will know he has a biological father who loved him enough to make the hardest decision, and on that day, if he wants to find you, it will be his choice. Julian's words were sincere. There was no arrogance in them, no pressure. Everything revolved around the child's well-being. Compared to that, Arthur's attachment felt selfish, empty. He closed his eyes in pain. He knew Julian was right. A stable, loving home was essential for a child's development, and he could no longer offer that. On what grounds should he interfere with someone else providing it? He had already destroyed too much. He could not let his ego destroy his son's future as well. I need to see her, he said with a broken voice. I want to hear it from her. Julian nodded in understanding. Of course, she is waiting for you in the cafe downstairs. Arthur adjusted his shirt collar, sighed deeply, and walked out of the room. Every step felt like walking on broken glass. In the cafe, Meredith was sitting by the window. 2 years had passed, yet she looked the same. She had a short, elegant, professional haircut and a perfectly tailored blazer. She exuded the confidence and grace of a successful woman, but her eyes remained clear, calm. Seeing him approach, she did not stand up, merely pointing to the seat across from her. How have you been? Arthur sat down, not knowing what to say. I am doing well, Meredith answered in a calm tone, as if talking to a distant acquaintance. The firm is thriving. Beckett is wonderful. And you? Clayton told me you are doing well at your new job. I am surviving, Arthur replied with a bitter smile. It is enough to pay the rent. A brief silence fell between them. Julian has already explained everything to you, Meredith finally said. Arthur nodded, not taking his eyes off her. Is this really what you want? She answered him with her gaze, unwavering. Arthur, we both need to look to the future. I left the past behind a long time ago. My only priority now is providing Beckett with the best environment to grow. She paused. Julian is wonderful with him, and Beckett absolutely adores him. When they are together, they are like a real father and son. Arthur tightened his lips. So you want to completely erase my existence as his father? A hint of reproach crept into his voice. Meredith slowly shook her head. A complex emotion appeared in her eyes. Pity, but above all, determination. I am not erasing you. I am protecting him. Her tone was firm. I do not want him growing up in the shadow of a broken family. I do not want him hearing comments from other parents at school. I do not want him wondering why his daddy does not live with us. She looked him straight in the eyes. Arthur, please answer one question for me. For the last 2 years, aside from sending money, have you fulfilled a single parental duty? Every word was like a needle piercing his chest. Do you know his favorite toy? Do you know what foods he is allergic to? Do you know which hand he reaches out with when he falls? Arthur could not answer, because it was all true. Giving him a complete family is the only thing I can do for him right now, Meredith continued. That is why I am asking you one last time. Her voice softened, but her decision was unshakable. Let us go. Let him go. Arthur looked at her for a long time. In her eyes, there was no longer a trace of the love she once harbored for him. There was only the fierce determination of a mother. He understood he had no right to hold them back. He picked up the pen Julian had left on the table. With trembling hands, he signed the document relinquishing his parental rights. The moment the ink dried, he felt the last bond connecting him to that world snap. After a long silence, he slid the document toward her. He felt as if that gesture had emptied his life. He stood up without looking at her and turned to leave. Arthur. Meredith's voice stopped him. He froze, not turning around. Thank you. Her voice was soft but firm. As compensation, the shares you surrendered in the firm will be valued at current market price. I will wire you the equivalent in cash. It is what you are owed for building it. Arthur's body tensed. He let out a bitter laugh and shook his head. Without turning back, he muttered, No need. Let that be my final gift to Beckett. He pushed the glass door and stepped out into the light. The light was bright, but he felt no warmth. He returned to his apartment, locked the door, and did not leave for the entire day. He did not cry. He did not get angry. He just sat in silence with an empty head. He felt like an empty shell floating in a vacuum. By evening, his phone vibrated with a notification from his bank. A massive wire transfer had hit his account. Arthur immediately understood that Meredith had ignored his refusal and sent him the buyout money for his shares anyway. He stared at the long row of zeros and could not help but feel the bitter irony. He had spent half his life fighting to achieve such wealth. And now, having lost everything that truly mattered to get it, the money was coming back to him as a sort of compensation for his own life. What did he need it for now? To buy another mansion, only to have no family inside? To start another architecture firm? He no longer had the ambition or the ego for that. The next day, Arthur made a decision. He handed in his resignation at the remodeling firm. He then used the money to buy a modest single-story house with a large plot of land in the countryside near Traverse City, Michigan, right in the heart of the wine and cherry region. He did not return to architecture. Instead, he devoted himself entirely to working the land and landscape architecture. He spent all his time on that plot of land. He tilled the soil, planted seeds, watered, fertilized. He cared for every plant with the same attention someone would devote to a child. He grew accustomed to the silence of nature and found a rhythm in that peace. Watching a seed sprout, watching it reach for the sun. His mind, previously restless and turbulent, began to find peace. He stopped reading financial news. He stopped following the industry, cut all ties with his former life, and lived like a modern hermit. He took the box with Beckett's photos and the copy of the document relinquishing his paternal rights and locked them in a drawer. He told himself that chapter of his life was permanently closed. What he did not know was that while he was finding peace in the dirt, Meredith was keeping her own promises. Meredith did not rush into marrying Julian. After receiving Arthur's signature, she used the exact amount of money he had tried to refuse to start a non-profit organization. She called it the Phoenix Initiative. As executive director, Meredith utilized her financial expertise and network to help women victimized by financial abuse or infidelity in marriage. She offered them legal support, taught them how to track hidden assets, provided psychological counseling resources, and helped them rebuild their economic independence. Her story caught the attention of mainstream media. The coverage generated a massive response. Thousands of people were moved by her strength, intelligence, and compassion. The Phoenix Initiative began receiving large donations, helping thousands of women across the country. Meredith became a symbol of empowerment. She was no longer anyone's wife or anyone's mother. She was simply Meredith. Independent, strong, brilliant. Arthur knew nothing about this. He had completely isolated himself from the world. Until one day, a year later, while buying rose fertilizer at a nursery, something caught his eye. On a magazine rack, he saw a cover. It was a widely read publication, and Meredith was on the cover. She stood in front of her foundation's headquarters, smiling with impressive confidence. Beside her, slightly behind, stood Dr. Julian Mercer, looking at her with pride and holding the hand of a little boy, Beckett. The three of them painted a perfect picture of harmony. The headline read, "From Betrayal to Empowerment: How Meredith Wolfe Turned Her Darkest Moment into Hope for Thousands." Arthur stood motionless for a long time, then picked up the magazine and began reading the interview. He read about the foundation, about the women she had helped, about her philosophy of independence and rebuilding. One quote stood out among all the rest: "I do not hate him. In a way, I am grateful to him. He taught me a harsh lesson. A woman's security should not depend on a marriage or a man. It should be born from her own capabilities and inner strength." Arthur smiled a genuine smile of relief. He was happy for her. Meredith did not stay stuck in her pain. She transformed her experiences into something that protected others. She had become someone extraordinary. And seeing her like this, he felt that he could finally let go. Let go. Easy to say, but healing takes years. Arthur closed the magazine and put it back on the shelf. He did not buy it. He no longer needed to look into the lives of others to find meaning in his own. He returned to his house in the country. It was a perfect spring day. The climbing roses were in full bloom, and bees buzzed softly in the warm air. He put on his work apron, grabbed his pruning shears, and began trimming the branches. Days passed quietly and steadily. Through his work, he met neighbors who shared his love for the land. Sometimes they sat on the porch, drank a beer, and talked about the weather or soil quality. No one knew his past. To them, he was just a quiet man with a special talent for gardens. Sometimes, at dawn, he would open the drawer and look at the photos. His son should be growing up now. In his imagination, he was no longer an infant. His face was leaning out, his body changing. He wondered if he liked soccer or hockey, if he struggled in school, but he never tried to find out. He knew he had lost that right. That silent longing was his punishment, and also the only connection he had left with the love he had lost. 10 years passed. Arthur was now 50. The southern sun and physical labor had left marks on his face, and his hair was completely gray, but his eyes were brighter and calmer. His small landscape architecture business had become very well known in the region. His hybrid roses were prized in local gardening circles. He never remarried. He lived peacefully, in solitude, accompanied by his plants and the changing seasons. On an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, he was in the yard, watering freshly planted hydrangeas. Suddenly, the bell at the front gate rang. Surprised, he looked up. He rarely received visitors at this hour. He wiped his hands on his pants and walked to the entrance. Opening the gate, he saw a boy of 12 or 13. He was wearing a simple, well-pressed shirt and a canvas backpack. His features were unmistakable. He looked like Arthur, but his presence was entirely different. His eyes were clear, confident, and reflected the peace and trust of someone who had grown up in a loving home. Arthur recognized him immediately, though he had only seen him as a toddler in photos. His heart began to pound in his chest. His hands tightened around the garden hose, and he could not help it. "Excuse me, are you Mr. Arthur Wolfe?" "Aye," the boy asked. His voice was clear, though with a slight nervous tremor. Arthur opened his mouth, but something tightened in his throat. He could not produce a single sound. He merely gave a firm nod. "My name is Beckett Mercer. Well, on paper it is Beckett Mercer, but I know I was born Beckett Wolfe." The boy looked him straight in the eyes with an open and calm expression. "My mom, Meredith." Strong emotion filled Arthur's eyes. He wanted to say 1,000 things, but he could not. "Can I come in and sit down for a minute?" Beckett asked, pointing to the flower-filled garden behind him. "Yes, of course. Please, come in." Arthur managed to choke out, quickly stepping aside. Beckett walked into the garden and looked around with genuine awe. He stopped in front of a rosebush with a deep purple hue. "Wow, these are amazing. These are Rhapsody in Blue. My dad says they are hard to take care of." Arthur was surprised. "You know about roses?" "My dad likes gardening." "I help him sometimes," Beckett replied with a smile. The dad he was talking about was, of course, Dr. Julian Mercer. A slight ache pierced Arthur's chest, but it was quickly replaced by a strange feeling of gratitude. They sat on the wicker chairs on the porch. Arthur poured him a glass of homemade iced tea. "How did you find me?" he finally asked. "Mom gave me the address," Beckett replied, taking a sip. "Actually, I know about you. My parents never hid anything from me. They told me the whole story. When I was old enough to understand, they showed me pictures of you." He paused briefly. "I came here today on my own. I just wanted to meet my biological father in person." He spoke with surprising maturity. There was no anger in him, no resentment. Arthur looked at the young man before him. Healthy, intelligent, well-mannered, and full of kindness. In that moment, the last trace of bitterness left in his heart vanished. He understood with absolute clarity that Meredith and Julian had given this child a life he never would have been able to offer. Signing those papers 10 years ago was the best decision of his life. "Do you hate me?" Arthur asked with a trembling voice. Beckett shook his head. "Mom explained to me that relationships between adults are complicated, that not everything is black or white. She told me you made a very serious mistake, but people make mistakes. The most important thing is to learn." He looked at him calmly. "She also told me to never let resentment define who I am." He paused for a moment before continuing. "And she asked me to give you something. She says she hopes you are doing well, and that knowing you found a peaceful life makes her happy." Arthur could not hold back any longer. Tears streamed down his face, tracing the furrows of his lived years. All this time Meredith knew about him. Not to track him, not to humiliate him, but simply to hope that one day he would find peace. She did not want to erase him from the world. She just wanted him to heal. He tried to say, choking on his tears. He wanted to say "I am sorry," but he knew those words were not enough. Beckett opened his backpack and pulled out a small, worn velvet box. He handed it to him. "Mom said I should give this to you. She said this is the one thing you never wanted to take." Arthur opened it with trembling hands. Inside lay an old Omega watch. It was the same watch Meredith had given him years ago from her first big bonus when she worked as an auditor. He had worn it for a while until money and ego drove him to replace it with an ostentatious Rolex. He never knew she had kept it all this time. Engraved on the steel case back were the words, "May your life be safe and peaceful." Arthur held the watch and felt as if his entire first half of life rested in his hands. He finally broke down. He covered his face with his hands and wept like a child, a deep weeping, like a man who had been lost for years and had finally found his way. Beckett said nothing. He sat there in silence, keeping him company. After a while, he stood up, adjusted a planter the wind had shifted, and carefully leveled the dirt. They spent the entire day on that porch. Father and son talked for hours about plants, about school, about the future. Arthur shared the lessons he had learned, hiding nothing. He hoped his mistakes would serve as warning signs on Beckett's path. As the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and purple, Beckett stood up. "Can I come visit you again sometime?" he asked, adjusting his backpack. Arthur nodded with emotion, smiling through his tears. "Yes. Whenever you want. These doors will always be open." Watching the boy walk away down the gravel path, Arthur felt a deep peace he had never experienced before. He knew his life had been marked by a massive mistake, but he had finally learned to forgive himself and accept the past. He looked at the Omega watch in his hand and strapped it to his wrist. It fit perfectly. The evening breeze rolled through the garden, carrying the scent of blooming roses. He had lost everything that built his ego, but somehow, at the end of the road, he found something infinitely more important. Not wealth, not fame, but a quiet redemption, born of love and forgiveness.